The internet caught it instantly, and once people saw it, they couldn't unsee it. One scroll, one silence, one very loud choice. Claressa Shields, fresh off praise from Monique herself, said absolutely nothing, and then suddenly flooded her page with Rihanna. Not one post, not two, everywhere. And just like that, a simple Instagram move turned into a full-blown culture conversation that has fans arguing, celebrities side-eyeing, and timelines spiraling into theories that feel way deeper than social media etiquette. Because this wasn't accidental. Monique didn't whisper her praise. She gave Claressa public respect, the kind that usually gets reposted, pinned, thanked, acknowledged. Especially from a legend who knows what it feels like to be overlooked, misunderstood, and iced out. But Claressa? Silence, no repost, no caption, no heart emoji, nothing. And then, boom, Rihanna content back to back to back, glowing, celebratory, unmistakable. The contrast was so loud it felt intentional. And the internet immediately asked the uncomfortable question, was this a snub or a statement? Fans started clocking timelines down to the minute. When Monique posted, when Claressa logged on, when the Rihanna posts went up. And suddenly, what could have been brushed off as coincidence started looking like choice. Because Claressa isn't new to this. She knows optics. She knows what gets noticed. And she knows exactly how silence reads when praise is sitting right there waiting to be acknowledged. Now the discourse is on fire. Some say Claressa is protecting her brand and choosing visibility over validation. Others say ignoring Monique feels disrespectful, especially given Monique's long history of being ignored herself. And hovering over all of it is one lingering thought nobody wants to say out loud. Who you acknowledge publicly says a lot about who you align with privately. This isn't just about Instagram posts anymore. It's about power, perception, and who gets platformed versus politely passed over. And judging by how fast this is blowing up, Claressa's silence might be louder than any caption she could have written. The moment fans noticed it, the energy shifted instantly. Not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. Monique, a veteran voice who understands industry politics better than most, publicly praised Claressa Shields in a way that felt intentional, supportive, and unmistakably respectful. It wasn't vague, it wasn't subtle. It was clear acknowledgement from someone who has lived through being celebrated one minute and erased the next. And yet, Claressa Shields said nothing. No repost, no comment, no acknowledgement at all. Just silence. And then, almost immediately after, her Instagram lit up with Rihanna, everywhere all at once like a visual megaphone. At first, people tried to give it grace. Maybe Claressa missed it. Maybe she hadn't been online. Maybe she planned to respond later. But that benefit of the doubt evaporated fast when fans realized Claressa was clearly active, posting, liking, engaging, just not with Monique. The timeline told the story without saying a word. Monique's praise sat untouched while Rihanna's image dominated Claressa's feed. And in the age of social media, silence in moments like that doesn't read as neutral. It reads as deliberate. What made this hit harder is who Monique is and what she represents. Monique isn't just another celebrity tossing out compliments for clout. She's someone whose career has been deeply shaped by public support and public rejection. Someone who knows exactly what it means when praise is ignored. That context mattered to fans, especially those who felt Claressa should have understood the weight of that moment. To them, it wasn't just about reposting a story. It was about recognizing solidarity. And then there was Rihanna, not just a post, multiple posts. Celebration, admiration, energy. Rihanna isn't controversial. She's universally loved, brand safe, aspirational. Posting Rihanna doesn't invite debate, it invites applause. And that's where the conversation got uncomfortable. Because suddenly, this didn't look like coincidence. It looked like curation. Like a choice to amplify one form of validation while quietly bypassing another. Fans began asking questions that went beyond Instagram etiquette. Why ignore Monique specifically? Was it about controversy avoidance? About brand alignment? About not wanting to be associated with someone who has challenged industry power structures publicly? Or was it simpler, Claressa choosing mainstream visibility over meaningful acknowledgement? Each theory carried its own implications, and none of them were flattering. The internet did what it always does next, it contextualized. People pulled up Claressa's past statements about respect, support, and being overlooked. Quotes about knowing your worth, about standing firm, about not needing validation. And those words, once empowering, were now being re-examined through a different lens. Because ignoring praise while loudly celebrating a global superstar doesn't look like independence. To some, it looked like selective engagement. Supporters rushed to Claressa's defense. They argued she doesn't owe anyone a repost, that she can acknowledge who she wants when she wants. That Instagram isn't a scoreboard for gratitude. And they're not wrong, technically. But critics countered with something harder to dismiss. Public platforms are never neutral. What you choose to amplify sends signals whether you intend it to or not, especially when the contrast is that stark. What made this situation even more charged was Claressa's recent history with public scrutiny. She's been navigating intense narratives about relationships, loyalty, and reputation. In moments like that, every move gets overanalyzed, but also becomes more revealing. Ignoring Monique while posting Rihanna felt to some like a strategic retreat into safety. Rihanna represents admiration without complication. Monique represents truth with friction, and choosing one over the other tells a story. The discussion quickly moved from, did she mean to ignore Monique? To, what does it say if she did? Because Monique's praise wasn't random. It was aligned. It was affirming Claressa's resilience, her strength, her refusal to be boxed in. And for that to go unacknowledged while celebrity worship flooded the feed felt, to many, like a missed moment of unity, or worse, a rejection of it. Another layer that made this louder was Claressa's awareness. She's media savvy. She understands optics. She knows how fast narratives spread, which made the silence feel even more intentional. If this were an accident, fans argued, it would have been corrected. A quick repost, a simple thank you, something, but nothing came. And the longer that nothing stretched, the more it hardened into meaning. Some fans pointed out that Claressa has a pattern of engaging selectively, especially during periods of high scrutiny. When things feel overwhelming, she leans into symbols of power, beauty, and untouchable status. Rihanna fits that perfectly. She's not just admired, she's untouchable. Associating with her image sends a message of elevation, not vulnerability. And in contrast, acknowledging Monique would have been grounding. Political, loaded. That contrast is what made the moment explode beyond social media gossip. It tapped into a larger conversation about who gets acknowledged publicly and who gets quietly passed over, about how alignment works in celebrity culture, about how praise from certain voices is treated as optional, while praise from others is amplified instantly, and about how women navigating public pressure sometimes choose safety over solidarity, even when they don't mean to. By the end of this phase, one thing was undeniable. Claressa's silence had become the story. Not because Monique demanded acknowledgement, but because the internet recognized the symbolism. Ignoring praise while celebrating power sends a message whether you intend it or not. And in this case, that message landed loudly. This wasn't about Rihanna versus Monique. It was about visibility versus validation, about mainstream appeal versus meaningful support, and about how, in a moment where Claressa could have bridged something real, she chose to post something safe instead. Whether that choice was strategic, subconscious, or purely personal, it didn't go unnoticed. And once the internet notices a pattern, it doesn't let it go easily. This wasn't just an Instagram moment, it was a mirror held up to how power, praise, and alignment really work in public life. Once the initial shock wore off, the conversation didn't die down, it deepened. Because this was no longer about one ignored post and a few Rihanna shoutouts. It became about pattern recognition, and the internet is ruthless when it thinks it's spotted one. People weren't just asking why Claressa didn't repost Monique. They were asking whether this moment fit into a larger habit of choosing visibility over solidarity, safety over substance, and untouchable icons over complicated voices. Fans began pulling receipts, not in the scandal sense, but in the behavioral sense. Screenshots of past interactions. Moments where Claressa had quickly acknowledged praise from mainstream celebrities while staying silent when support came from figures who carry controversy, critique, or uncomfortable truth. None of it was damning on its own, but stacked together, it created a picture that people couldn't ignore. Because in celebrity culture, patterns don't need to be intentional to be meaningful. They just need to be consistent. The Rihanna posting, in particular, became symbolic. Rihanna isn't just a pop star. She's a brand, a shield. Admiration for her is universally accepted, rarely questioned, and always rewarded with positive engagement. Posting Rihanna is a social media safe move. It says taste, aspiration, alignment with global power. There's no downside, no think pieces, no uncomfortable questions. And that's why the contrast with Monique felt so loud. Monique's praise came with history, context, and edge. Acknowledging it would have meant stepping into a conversation, not just a moment. And that's where the divide sharpened. Supporters of Claressa argued that she's allowed. The discourse then widened beyond Claressa herself. It became a referendum on how Black women in the public eye are allowed, or not allowed, to align. Some argued that Claressa was being unfairly scrutinized, expected to carry everyone's banner simply because she's visible. Others countered that visibility comes with responsibility, whether you ask for it or not, and that ignoring praise from someone who understands marginalization while celebrating a global superstar sends a message about whose voices are considered safe to uplift. What made this phase especially volatile was how personal it felt to people watching. Many saw themselves in Monique, overlooked, praised quietly, ignored publicly. Others saw themselves in Claressa, exhausted, scrutinized, choosing joy where they can find it. And because both perspectives were relatable, the debate didn't resolve. It hardened. Claressa's continued silence only added fuel. No clarification, no acknowledgement, no subtle nod, nothing. And the absence of response became its own kind of response. Some interpreted it as doubling down, others as refusal to engage in what she may see as manufactured outrage. But in the court of public opinion, silence doesn't pause the conversation, it shapes it. By now, the Rihanna posts weren't just posts. They were being read as counter-programming, as a way to redirect attention toward aspirational imagery and away from uncomfortable discourse. Whether intentional or not, it worked, but at a cost, because people noticed the pivot. And noticing a pivot invites interpretation. The most telling shift in this phase was how the conversation stopped being about Instagram manners and started being about values. Who do you publicly thank? Who do you quietly ignore? Whose support is considered worth amplifying? Those questions don't have easy answers, but they linger. And once they're asked, they don't disappear just because the feed refreshes. By the end of this section of the saga, Claressa's silence had become layered. It was no longer just an ignored repost. It was a symbol onto which people projected their own experiences with recognition, erasure, and selective support. And while that projection may not be fair to Claressa as an individual, it's an inevitable consequence of public life. This phase didn't bring resolution. It brought clarity of tension between safety and solidarity, between brand and community, between joy and responsibility. And as long as Claressa continues to say nothing about Monique's praise while amplifying everything else, that tension isn't going anywhere. It's just waiting for the next moment to resurface, louder, sharper, and harder to ignore. By the time this moment reached its third phase, the internet had stopped arguing about Instagram etiquette and started grappling with something far more uncomfortable: what silence says when it's repeated. Because at this point, Claressa Shields' decision not to acknowledge Monique's praise no longer looked like a one-off oversight or a fleeting mood. It looked like a boundary. And boundaries, once perceived, force people to confront why they exist. The conversation matured into something heavier and quieter. People weren't yelling anymore, they were reflecting, asking whether this moment revealed a deeper truth about how public figures navigate power, safety, and alignment. Because Claressa didn't just ignore Monique once. She continued moving forward as if the praise never happened, while maintaining a highly curated, highly visible presence elsewhere. That consistency is what gave the silence weight. It wasn't accidental, it was sustained. What became increasingly clear is that this wasn't about disrespect in the traditional sense. Claressa didn't shade Monique, she didn't contradict her. She didn't undermine her, she simply didn't engage. And in public life, non-engagement is often the cleanest form of separation. It allows distance without confrontation. It avoids escalation while still drawing a line. And many began to suspect that's exactly what was happening here. People started talking less about Monique as an individual and more about what she represents. Monique represents friction. She represents speaking up when it costs you something. She represents refusing to make yourself palatable for systems that demand silence in exchange for access. Rihanna, by contrast, represents transcendence. She exists above critique. Loving Rihanna is not a stance, it's a given. And once that comparison settled in, Claressa's choices began to look less like preference and more like positioning. Some fans argued this was unfair, that Claressa shouldn't be expected to carry the weight of anyone else's battles, that she didn't ask to be a symbol, that she's allowed to admire Rihanna without it being politicized. And all of that is true. But the counterargument landed just as hard. When you are visible, your choices are read symbolically, whether you consent to that or not, especially when those choices are consistent. What made this phase especially revealing was how little Claressa seemed bothered by the discourse. She didn't attempt to course correct. She didn't offer clarification. She didn't soften the moment with a belated acknowledgement. That lack of reaction suggested comfort with the interpretation, or at least acceptance of it. And that acceptance shifted the tone. People stopped demanding an explanation and started accepting the reality. Claressa chose what and who to amplify. The discussion then turned inward. People began asking themselves uncomfortable questions. How often do we praise people privately but hesitate to support them publicly? How often do we gravitate toward voices that are easy to celebrate and avoid those that challenge us? How often do we choose alignment that feels safe over solidarity that feels risky? Claressa became the focal point for those questions, not because she created them, but because her silence crystallized them. Another subtle but important shift happened here. Empathy entered the chat, not just for Monique, but for Claressa too. Some viewers recognized that Claressa has been under intense scrutiny lately, criticized, analyzed, questioned from every angle. In that state, choosing joy, beauty, and uncomplicated admiration makes emotional sense. Rihanna offers escape. Monique offers confrontation. And when someone is already emotionally taxed, confrontation can feel unbearable. But empathy didn't erase accountability. It complicated it, because people also acknowledged that choosing escape repeatedly has consequences. It doesn't make you wrong, but it does shape how others experience you. And in this case, many felt that Monique's praise deserved acknowledgement, not because of obligation, but because of what it represented. A rare moment of intergenerational recognition between women who understand pressure differently but deeply. By now, the silence had done its work. It reframed Claressa not as someone who missed a moment, but as someone who made a choice. And once something is understood as a choice, people stop waiting for correction. They adjust their expectations. Some supporters doubled down, praising her for protecting her brand and refusing to be pulled into discourse she didn't ask for. Others quietly disengaged, feeling that something meaningful had been sidestepped. The most telling development in this phase was that the outrage faded, but the impression didn't. People stopped posting think pieces, the hashtags cooled, but the takeaway lingered. Claressa Shields, intentionally or not, had drawn a line around the kind of engagement she was willing to have publicly. And Monique's praise fell outside that line. This didn't turn Claressa into a villain. It didn't turn Monique into a victim. It did something subtler and more lasting. It exposed how alignment works when cameras are always on. How some voices are amplified because they're safe, and others are appreciated quietly because they're complicated. How praise can exist without acknowledgement, and how that absence can still hurt. As this chapter settles, there's no big confrontation coming, no dramatic response, no reconciliation post, and that in itself is the conclusion. Claressa has moved on, the feed has refreshed, Rihanna remains everywhere, Monique's praise remains unaddressed, and the internet, having said its piece, has filed this away as another moment where silence spoke louder than words. In the end, this wasn't about Instagram. It was about visibility, about who gets reflected back when they offer support, about how power decides what gets echoed and what gets absorbed quietly. Claressa Shields didn't explain herself, and she doesn't have to. But in choosing not to, she allowed the world to see something real about how public figures navigate praise, pressure,